Hello and welcome to Module 2, Sunday, of EDC 672, Creating and Integrating Technology in the Classroom. This course is being offered through the State University of New York at Buffalo State College, and this is Dr. Matthew Swerdloff, the professor for the course. This module will begin our discussion of differentiating instruction, what that means, and how it can be used in the classroom. Let's start by talking about what differentiation is. This is a term that is used often in educational settings, and oftentimes people do not understand it, do not understand the research basis behind it, and why it's important. So let's begin by talking about the pioneer in this field, who is Dr. Carol Tomlinson. She is a researcher and a professor at the University of Virginia in the United States, and she has been one of the key proponents of differentiating instruction. She has written many books on the topic and lectured widely, and really much of the research around differentiation comes from her work and her writings. So it's important to know that there is ample research to support the claim that teachers that differentiate instruction get better results in terms of academic outcomes from their students. And that's something that really we should not take for granted. Oftentimes we adopt new educational initiatives or strategies without having a research base, and in this case we do have a research base that gives us good evidence that this is a valuable strategy to use in our classrooms. One thing that's important about differentiated instruction is it is designed to accommodate all learners. And in many classrooms, perhaps not yours here, but in many classrooms elsewhere, and certainly in the United States, students come from very diverse backgrounds, socioeconomic diversity, racial and ethnic diversity, diversity in terms of abilities and needs and prior experiences. So it really is an important strategy to use when you have a classroom of 20, 25, or 30 students that have such a wide background, and this is a great way to help reach learners where they are. Differentiation is a personalized way of learning, and it doesn't go so far as to say that in a class of 25 students you will have 25 lessons, but it does say that perhaps in that class of 25 students you will have 5 groups. And those 5 groups will be grouped based upon some criteria, either ability or interest, and the instruction will be varied to meet those needs. And finally, differentiation is really student-centered. It's student-focused, and it's designed to meet students where they are, to catch them at what they're interested in and where their abilities are. When we talk about differentiation, in the Tomlinson model, there's really 4 areas that are differentiated, and this is the key, I think, to understanding differentiation. The 4 areas are process, product, content, and environment. And you don't have to differentiate all 4 areas all the time, but it's important to understand that you should address these 4 areas, you should be aware of them, and at different times you should differentiate based on what your student population looks like in 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of those areas. And we'll get into explaining what those 4 areas are in just a moment. So let's talk about process. So process is how you deliver instruction. It's how you as the teacher present content to the students. And there are many ways to do that. And the most common way, and probably the least effective way, is lecture. So that is the one way that many teachers deliver content to their students. They sit in front of the class and lecture to their students, and students are expected to take notes. That is only one way, though, and it's important that we vary that based on the needs and abilities and interests of our students. So process is also what the students do to help internalize their learning. So what activities they do either while you're delivering the content or after you're delivering the content. How do students make that content real? What kinds of activities do they do to help them learn? That is another aspect of process. So let's talk about some different ways that you can vary how you deliver instruction and the activities that students do. So one way is computer-aided instruction, or CAI. There are certainly many programs and websites and resources available to deliver instruction to students without you needing to be present. One of the big advantages of CAI is it is adaptable, so it will adjust the pace and the content based on the student feedback, and it's also portable, so students can engage in computer-aided instruction from home, from school, from a mobile device, so they have a lot of freedom and flexibility where and when they can access the content. So group work. So as I said previously, in a class of 25 students, one way that you could differentiate the process is by grouping students. So you could have 5 groups that work together as opposed to 25 students that work individually. Hands-on activities or labs. This is a great way to differentiate process. So students, again, some students might be fine reading a textbook about a scientific theory and absorbing it and internalizing. Some students might need to actually practice that with a laboratory experiment to understand it. Project-based learning. So again, every student is different, but we will find that in the typical classroom, you will find that some students that are really good writers and some students that are more builders or tinkerers or artists, and for them, the process is more effective if they're doing some kind of a hands-on project. And of course, lecture, least effective, most widely used form of instruction. It has its place. So in this example right now, I'm delivering some content to you based on a straight lecture, albeit in video format. It's really a lecture where you're expected to sit and listen and take notes and look at the screen. So for this population, and because this is a distance environment, this is probably an effective methodology. So when we talk about process, again, it's important that you assess your students and you have a way of recognizing where your students' abilities are and which sort of methodology works best for them, either individually or in groups, using computers or not, hands-on, lecture. There's many ways to vary how you deliver instruction, and it's important that you think about that and try to deliver in a variety of ways to your students. So the other area to vary is the product. And the product is what the students do to demonstrate learning. So in the typical scenario, a teacher will lecture and a student will take notes and then take a test. So again, not a very effective methodology. It's effective in testing if students can memorize what they hear, but not necessarily effective in testing if students really understand the content. So that's one example, but there are many ways for students to demonstrate learning. So one of the things to keep in mind is that students have different learning styles, and some are able to demonstrate learning in the traditional format of a multiple choice test or a research paper, and some are not as comfortable with that and can more effectively demonstrate learning in a different way. What's important to realize is you're differentiating so that you can get a more accurate picture of how much the students have learned. It's not a matter of giving the students a crutch or giving them an advantage. It's a matter of giving you a more accurate assessment so you understand where your students are. And that's really important because you as a teacher, you need to know where your students are, and you can't do that unless you have an accurate assessment. Differentiating the product will help give you an accurate assessment. So we do want to vary these often. We want to mix these up. And here's some examples of how you can differentiate products. So very common, more common in the upper grades. Research paper is certainly a valid way for students to demonstrate that they have mastered the content. They've read, they've listened to lecture, they've watched videos. They need to synthesize it all into a written paper. That is a valid method for many students. Some students whether they're classified as special education or not, um, really have a hard time with that written paper, and they might do better with a presentation, either a PowerPoint or a flip chart or some sort of manipulative, where they can get in front of the class and explain in their own terms using perhaps index cards. They can explain what they've learned, even though they might not be able to write it in 20-page paper. Hands-on projects. For some students, they can demonstrate their understanding of the content through a 3D project, such as a diorama or a mobile or a scale model or an experiment that they can do to demonstrate a scientific concept. Those are all valid ways for a student to demonstrate understanding of content. Many students are comfortable producing videos, and some students who would not be comfortable presenting in front of the class would be fine presenting in front of a video and showing that video to the class. So that's one other way that students can demonstrate knowledge. Certainly creating games, whether it's a video game or a traditional board game, that's a valid way to demonstrate mastery of content. And finally, poster board, banners, all those sorts of things. That's an effective way, whether it's a digital poster or a physical poster. That's one way students can demonstrate learning. These are all ways that are valuable and valid depending on the student and the content and the situation. And it's important that you have all of these tools in your toolkit and that you're able to vary them as often as needed so that you can get an accurate picture of where your students are. The next area where we can begin to talk about differentiating is content. And content is, this one is kind of tricky for some people sometimes. Content is what students are learning. So it's the information that you are delivering, whether it's facts or concepts or theories or ideas or ways of thinking. It's really the kind of like the what you need to cover idea of instruction. What are the key facts and ideas that students need to learn? One thing to keep in mind that you may vary the content, but you do need to maintain the objectives. So an example of this would be if the objective of your unit is students will understand the causes of the American Civil War. That's your objective. You want all of your students to understand the causes of the American Civil War. You don't want to vary that. You want all of your students to reach that objective. However, you may do it in different ways. So some students may read a historical artifacts, historical writings from the period that are perhaps difficult to read, but they may be at a level where they can read them. They may read newspapers or letters from the period to help them understand. Other students may watch videos. Other students may read a textbook. Other students may do work in a group to understand some information. So what you're doing is you're changing sort of the content, but you're not changing the objective. So this is a little bit harder to understand, but one thing you can think about is you can vary the depth and the breadth and the details, but don't change the objective. You want the objective to stay the same for all students. That's a very important thing to keep in mind. And last, we'll talk about differentiating the environment. So this is perhaps the simplest way to differentiate and probably done the least, but differentiating the environment is just really the space and place where students learn. So what kind of a physical environment are students in when they're learning? And you can think about that in terms of, are they in a classroom or are they outside? Physical space. Is it a classroom with bright lights? Are the lights turned off so students can work in a dimmed atmosphere? Are they sitting at their desks? Are they sitting on the floor in beanbags? Are they spread out on the lawn with microscopes? So varying that environment can really have a big difference for students in terms of their ability to process new information. The soundscape. So, is there music playing in the background? Do you insist that everyone be dead silent? Or is it a bustling and loud classroom where people are working and there's the sound of people talking and discussing? Those are all things that you need to think about when you're differentiating and really be purposeful about how you're selecting this environment. Temperature. Are the windows wide open? Is it a cool day? Is it a hot day? What is it like as far as temperature? Is it, many times, depending on where you are and the seasons, students are in school when the summer is beginning and it's a very hot environment, and that really affects learning, and it's important to be aware of that. So that's sort of some of the ideas about environment and how you can differentiate it. And sometimes you have no control over this, and sometimes you do. But it's even if you don't have control, it's important to be aware of it. So let's just take a look at this quote from Carol Tomlinson. And really, it kind of sums up nicely some of the thoughts that we've talked about. And really, what I like about this is she talks about it having a hefty dose of common sense. And that's really, really it. It really is common sense. Even though there's this whole theory, it really, if you think about yourself as a learner and your colleagues, you'll realize that you don't learn the same way the teacher in the next classroom does. And students are the same way. Every student learns differently. Every student has preferences and ways that are more effective. And it's important for us as adults to keep that in mind and really use that information when we plan instruction. The other thing that I think is useful to keep in mind is this idea of active planning for student differences. And really, the first step of differentiation is really assessing your students. And once you've assessed your students and you know what their differences are, you can begin to plan your instruction so that you can help deliver effective instruction that takes their differences into account. So that's the end of this module, and I'll just want to recap what you need to work on before I see you again. So review all content on the course site on the Sunday tab. Please review the Tomlinson text again. We'll be discussing it in class. And you're going to be working on creating a differentiated unit outline. This you'll be doing in class, but I just want you to think about it. Think about what unit you want to use for this project. So it should be a 5 to 6 week unit in your curriculum that you can use to practice learning differentiation. And then this again we'll work on this together. You're going to create your objectives, your outcomes, your assignments, and assessments. But I want you to start thinking about what you want to do for that, and then we'll do a draft version of that in class, and we'll start it in class also as well. So that's what you need to work on this evening before the next class. That's the end of the Module 2 Sunday module. Thank you.